Díomh gach daoine agus fáilte go dtí a coddamh brethbh is mise cuimhín ó Flanagan. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy, and I'm Kevin Flanagan. And in tonight's episode, we're going to be speaking to Lorcan from Indigenous Ireland. And some of you may know Indigenous Ireland because I interviewed Lorcan and his partner in crime, 𝗟𝗩𝗢𝗎𝗄𝗎, at the Indigenous Peoples World Forum last year. But it was a very short interview. It was only about 15 or 20 minutes long. And I really wanted to sit down with Lorcan again. And unfortunately, Helen couldn't make it, and his other partner in crime, Shane O'Connor, they couldn't make it. So it's just me and Lorcan tonight. And I was very grateful to have the opportunity to sit down with Lorcan and ask him questions about what inspired him to set up Erdu and his vision for the future. So without me blabbing on for another 5 or 10 minutes, let's just jump straight into the interview and hear what Lorcan has to say. Hello, Lorcan. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I'm delighted to have you here. But for those who don't know you, could you please just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your background and why are you here?
Much Kevin, Kevin, 𝗟𝗢𝗎𝗢𝗎𝗢𝗎 mé 𝗟𝗎𝗎 well, it's Michelle Lorcan McGillivray, Gaelic, agus tá mé gobar le Dúchas. So thank you very much for having me on today, Kevin. My name is Lorcan McBride. I am a member of Indigenous Ireland, 𝗟liche, or in English, and Irish Dúchas. And we can maybe come on to the difference between those two terms of description. So what am I, or who am I? I've been working for a number of years in outdoor adventure work. I set up my own business in Derry, up in the northwest of Ireland. Before that, I worked in overseas development for about 10 years with a national organisation in Ireland that does humanitarian relief work. And prior to that, I pretty much was working in youth and community work in the northwest of Ireland. By training, I am a theatre practitioner, believe it or not. So I've kind of gone a long road through various different types of careers. And yeah, that's me currently. I'm a business owner and my voluntary work goes into Erdu.
Excellent. So could you explain or share your personal journey and how did you, because I know you're not the only individual in Erdu. So could you explain your personal journey? Like what were the steps that led you to co-found Erdu? What early experiences have you had with the land and the sea or Irish cultural heritage that sparked your interest? And I detecting like a sense of urgency in your work. Would it be right to say that?
Well, perhaps there's a lot to do, and sometimes I would get a wee bit frustrated with the amount of time you can spend doing nonsense and getting distracted. And that's pointed more at myself than any other members of my community or family. But the more you do, I suppose, the more you realize there's stuff to do and time moves on. How did I come into this work? I suppose I've always had a real graft for the outdoors, and it came from early experiences in my family, being parts of different organizations that brought young people outdoors, being exposed to hiking from a very early age in Europe through my family, and keeping that, I suppose, modality when I was working in office-based jobs, always needing that kind of escape into the outdoors without really understanding the depth of the foundation that was being built. I eventually decided to found a business based on outdoor adventure. And at the start of that, the attempt, having worked for about 10 years in a humanitarian aid agency and long-term development agency, looking at global poverty and human rights. Um, while you can achieve a certain amount through that kind of work personally, you're always a very small part of a bigger process. And some of the objectives are very long term. And I wanted to get more up hands and personal with people, particularly on our island, and how they can affect change within their lives and within humanity as such. So when I set up the adventure business, it was really based around personal development and personal development in the context of outdoors, about being in the natural environment and how those two things work together, personal growth and connection stroke protection with nature. And the business pretty much continues to do that through very fairly conventional means like outdoor pursuits elements. I got a grant, a scholarship to go overseas in 2013, and it was very, you know, um, you could say random, or you could say there was some sort of higher power at work at the time. But I happened to have a journalist out on a kayak trip around the very north of Ireland, Malin Head, and it was Paddy's Day, and the sea hadn't quite settled. It was quite cold, but we had a 2-day experience from kayaking and camping, and she was writing an article. And I told her I was going to New Zealand on a study trip. Um, I don't think I got there till November, so I was must have been in the planning stages. And she said, "Well, look up this guy. If you get there, and this guy's name is Joe Dherty." And for anybody who knows the island, they'll know that the Dohertys are kind of a clan, sub-clan of the O'Neills, for want of a better expression, based largely in the northwest of Ireland and particularly around Derry. And I was like, "Is he an Irish fella living in, New Zealand?" And she says, "No, he's a Maori." And I said, "Well, how come he's a Maori with a name like Doherty?" And that was kind of the beginning of it. Um, finally arrived in New Zealand in November that year, 2013. And it so happened that when I got off the plane, hired a wee dinky car and turned on the radio, there was all this chatter about Waitangi Day, which is kind of, it resonated with me like our 12th of July. And for somebody who's been brought up in the north, that's when usually all hell used to break loose, at least on the airwaves, if not in the streets, around the
Yeah.
cultural controversies.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So I actually felt at home right away that I was going to a place that there was equally fairly the social controversies of the legacies of settlement and occupation were
Mm.
alive and well. Like somebody, I think one of the Maori ladies had punched somebody, as far as I remember, and this was the breaking news story.
So
Punched a
could you
white
just,
man.
for those who don't know, or don't like have a fair idea what you're talking about, could you just unpack what was the controversy among the Maoris in New Zealand?
Do you know, I don't know exactly what was going on at that time. Like, really, I was a complete novice, and I wasn't, I hadn't really read an awful lot about Maori culture. I'd looked up a couple of people on the net, and I thought, I could perhaps include them in my research. Um, I suppose Watangi Day would be like Independence Day, or more
Gotcha.
like the Peace Agreement Day. So in a cultural framework quite dissimilar to ours, and this has had ramifications historically for New Zealand. And when we compare the two islands, they're two kind of islands in the middle of, the seas with similar issues in some ways, both occupied at one stage by Britain. Um, their Waitangi Day is a celebration of their joint peace agreement, where
Gotcha. Yeah. Hmm.
legalistically there was an agreement between the settler class, or you might call the Pakia people, as they're called by the Maori, and the Maori tribes, to come to a kind of agreement about future governance. And the controversy continues in on to this day because there's a treatise in English and a treatise in Maori of the laws and the agreements that were made, and they differ.
Yeah.
differ in their interpretation and in their implementation. So I suppose I was walking into a context that, in a strange way, I was familiar with the types of controversies, that were there. So I
Yeah.
suppose on the side I was bringing cultural baggage. I hadn't really thought of it as a cultural trip in that I was there to look at how green was adventure tourism. This was my field of work, and New Zealand seemed to be a world-class leader with all the optics of, pure countryside. And as I went through this 3-week study trip, the kind of agenda just began to, you know, kind of like a drunk man, it began to kind of stagger off the pavement of what I was supposed to be doing into this other world.
So I might have distracted you because I think you were going to talk about Mr. Doherty.
Hmm. Well, Joe was one of my ports of call just on my trip, and I was ticking them off as I went along. I had to go to this center and that center and ask them about different ways they worked. How could they be adventure businesses and be sustainable? So in hindsight, I was very much working within the system. I was just looking at, here's the system, this is the way it works, and how good can you make your system within that system, within the overall architecture of our societies, the way we're told they're constructed. When I went to meet Joe, like the first thing he ran a tourism business similar to myself. Um, but the first thing was just the open-hearted welcome. Like, he didn't know me from anybody. He literally opened the door. We sat down, and I was going to stay in his house that night, and he was going to host me on a tour. He's is and was part of the Two Boy tribe, um, and that was one of the bigger, possibly the biggest consolidated tribes in the North Island in Aotearoa. And at the time, although I wasn't aware of it when I first met him, they were negotiating a kind of, uh, you might frame it as a handback of land of their tribal territories from the government, but it was really a joint management process between the government and the tribal leaders. And he was in the middle of that process of being part of those negotiations. He obviously wasn't the only one. So he was very busy. He worked for the Department of Conservation, and he was seminal in a lot of the cultural revival processes uh, through his tribe, and well connected. So Joe greeted me, we spent some time, and then I went out on one of his tours. So for me, it was really the start of something that I really didn't know what I was getting into. It's like going into a place you think is going to be a swimming pool, and then it turns into a stormy sea. But very gradually.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt the video, folks. I do hope you're enjoying it. And if you are, use this opportunity to please tickle the like button and hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And if you do want to be notified for when future videos are uploaded, make sure you hit the bell notification as well. And just to use this opportunity to remind you to check out the brehonacademy.org. That's where you're going to find articles on all of the topics that we talk about on this channel. You're also going to find information about my online courses. We have 3 of them: Early Irish Culture and Society, Irish Mythology, and the Brehon Laws of Early Ireland. We also have an online store over there, so if you want to support me that way, you can buy a couple of t-shirts or postcards or bookmarks. And if you want to become a member, it's completely free to become a member of my website, and that will give you access to the members library, which has over 130 downloadable resources, and that's growing all the time. If you want to support me financially on a monthly basis, consider becoming a member of my YouTube channel. Membership starts from as little as $2 per month, and that will give you access to exclusive videos and other goodies and things like that. Now, we're also on social media as well. So we have a presence on Facebook, we have a presence on X, we also have a Telegram channel, and we have a TikTok channel as well. And my New Year's resolution is to start posting more on TikTok as well. Now, with all of that being said, sorry for the interruption, and let's jump back into the interview.
There were people I'd looked up along the way. I suppose when I began to go along this 3 week journey, I was talking to the 𝗟ci people, the settler people from Irish, Scots, English, other nation heritage, mostly. And I remember visiting one of their centres, and um, this young man had obviously been schooled with Maori and had grown up as a 𝗟ci person, as a settler among Maori. And he said to me one day, if you and I go up a hill and stay overnight in a tent, and we kind of have we have a amazing night, on our own. That for us is about our personal kind of enhancement and our development, and we see that very much, as something that's going to benefit us. And he said, if a Maori does that, you know, they're up there communing with their brothers and sisters. They're talking to the natural elements who they don't see as something distinct from, this idea of the individual that we would be locked in. And it was the first time that I began to kind of undersee it from, the 𝗟ci perspective, looking into the Maori world and how, we're coming up to this idea of having a lens, how you see reality being fundamentally different depending on what lens. So this guy was basically saying, you've got a lens, um, and you're seeing the world through that lens. So fast forward just towards the end of the trip, and I was about to leave. It had a couple of days walking away out of my comfort zone, um, in high mountains in the South Island, and I got a phone call. I was literally driving to the airport, and I got a phone call. And this guy, he's a fella I'd been trying to look up a couple of Maori leaders who had researched. And this guy said, "Oh, good day, you know, is this Lorcan or whatever?" And I said, "Yeah." And I pulled the car over to the side of the road, and he said, "I wasn't going to call you because I thought you were English, but then somebody told me you're Irish." So that was really interesting, I suppose, because that kind of got my attention. So the guy on the phone was Dr. 𝗟cie𝗿𝗰𝗆𝗍𝗄, who I subsequently, along with Joe's family, I developed these kind of two streams of connection with Maori tribes and iwi. Um, and that conversation started and never really finished and still hasn't finished. And I didn't realize at the time and this is what I've written in the Triscoly process, was one of the first publications we tried to put out from our perspective. I didn't realize at the time I was kind of being spoon fed like a baby. That he was intentionally, I was like, it was almost like a parent going to a child and with a wee rattle and going, "Hey, the wee rattle there, it makes a sound." Because he was feeding me this stuff, and he wasn't going to do a dump because I wouldn't have understood anything that he was saying. But he would say things like, "There's no human health solution to a human health problem."
Yeah.
And you go, "What does that mean? What does that mean?" You know what I mean? And he'd leave it with you. So he was dumping these little kind of
What do
triggers.
you think it means now at this point?
Oh, it's like the ABCs. It's like the ABCs, it's just like, well, of course, it's we're all affected by the ecosystem that we live
Mm-hmm.
in,
Mm-hmm.
and we pretend or think or have been educated into this modality that we're not, that we're at the top of that, or
Mm.
we manage to control that, and that's just a complete fiction that we're led to
Yeah.
believe or we buy into. And of course, going on from that, his next kind of mantra to me would have been, if we go out into the environment and we're thinking just of our own gain from that, or what we're going to personally gain from it, and linking back to what that other fella had been telling me about spending the night in the tent, he says, if that's our focus, we're not going to gain anything, or we'll gain a minimal amount. But if our focus is to honor where we are and to appreciate, and they would say mana, we would say kind of bring value and praise to the place, that we are going to benefit. We will benefit as a subsidiary of that place, as one representative of life, but in with all the other representatives of life. Um, and I suppose previously, when you look at it systemically, previously, I'd been thinking in the former way of viewing the world. I wanted to help people be developed or develop themselves and sustain the environment. And those were two separate things. But implicitly, the gain was kind of the people were going to be sustained by the environment. And then you would look back in and sustain the environment, like litter pick or do something restorative. But it wasn't couched in anything but very practical terms, if that makes sense.
Does,
Where
yeah.
he was person really was a spiritual agenda. However, whatever way you see faith or the element of humanity that is about spirit, um, because we have different languages between what we now call Dúla and the Maori would call Atua, natural elements, the things that exist with some sort of life in the world. They can be rocks, they can be drops of water, they can be plants and animals. Um, our commonality with those things, if we see them as objects, they're going to behave as objects. If we see
Mm,
them as living things, they are going to
yeah.
behave differently. And we have so many languages. And I suppose then the job is how do we learn the language of the doula?
Yeah. So just on the topic of languages, at the start of the interview, you said that there's a difference between the English name for Indigenous Ireland and the Irish name Erdu. Could you maybe just explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, the first iteration of what we were trying to do um, came through an invitation to 𝗤𝘩𝘢 and other people to come back to Ireland after my visit in 2013 to do something with us in our own land. And the motivation was kind of pure in a sense. It was just, I don't know what to do. I'm confused. There's lots of things going around my head. Does it, you know, do I have to go into Celtic culture? Do I have to go into like what part of our divided and conflicted piece of land here from the north to the south to the sectarian divide in the north? Do I place
Yeah.
myself? And I was quite confused. So the invitation was sent and responded to, and we called that we called that gathering First Nations Ireland, and in a way it was just a working title, but there were a number of people kind of galvanized around that particular title, and then people pointed out, well, First Nations really refers to Plains North American people, original people in Turtle
Yeah.
Island, North America. So there was all those things around language that weren't very, we didn't really understand what we were doing, I suppose. Um, Now, what was really interesting was that during that gathering, which was about a week long, we had time outdoors, we had time indoors, where he was another of his cohort. There was four Maori came all together. We're talking about their experience and their understanding, but one of our colleagues and somebody who would have been seminal to what we were doing, Dr. Liam Campbell, um, it kind of while we were bringing forward many ideas to kind of put into the basket, the Brehon laws being one of them, which we spent a bit of time looking at. Um, this term Dúchas came to the fore as a kind of working title and concept that we could focus on, and it started out really like a baby again. We were like, "Well, what about this?" Or it was Liam really introduced it and to try to kind of gain some sort of traction with everybody and explain. 'Cause I'd never heard the term in my life. I didn't know what Dúchas was or meant. So the way Liam translated it at the time, it was Dúchas means or represents being, identity, and belonging in nature. Um, there not being one or a very accurate word for landscape in
Yeah.
Irish, and
Hmm.
that landscape comes from landscraft, I believe, a Dutch word. that kind of objectivizes language or objectivizes nature and puts it outside of ourselves. Dúchas kind of is the opposite in that it brings nature into our being, identity, and
Mm.
belonging. So I suppose
And
we can
as
use
far
them.
as I know, there's no direct English translation for Dúchasach, um, because it's we just list a number of words that kind of point in the direction of what we think it means and what we feel it means. Words like heritage or
Mm,
indigenous
mm,
often come up in that list. But
mm.
I love that about the Irish language that, you have words that mean layers, they have layers of meaning that you can't accurately describe with an English word.
Yeah, and th this is what many people have been, pointing towards, Mankin being one of them, in his prolific output. Um, and also that things are defined sometimes by other things. So Dúchas being defined to a certain extent by Diracht, and Diracht meaning exile, also depression. So for people who are just relearning their language as kind of part of the current cultural revival around language and other things on this island, those concepts kind of become stepping stones. And Dúchas in particular became a real stepping stone for us into the practice that we needed to do. So out of it came a collaborative piece of work called the Triscoly process and 𝘠𝘠𝘢, based upon some of the earliest inscriptions that we have at Newgrange, which are pre-Celtic, um, and modeled, trying to set up a non-dualistic system of relearning and learning what we feel we need to do. When it came to Indigenous Ireland, that kind of term came up much later, I think 2018. And it was a wee bit of a cheeky, this is the third trip to Aotearoa then on the return journey, kind of thinking, well, why don't we just put those two words together, you know, and see what happens? And a lot has happened in that a lot of people have liked it and a lot of people have not liked it because it's set a challenge to again to the lens that we see
Yeah.
the word
Uh-huh.
through.
Yeah.
And it's a language lens, but it's also a concept lens. And it's also a lens to do with our psychology, like how we think about ourselves. So the intention between those two words was always about a conversation. Let's allow these two words and what it means to converse and let the people converse on it. So it was a challenge. If we can describe a plant as indigenous to this land, if we can describe an animal as native or non-native and indigenous, can we describe people? And that immediately became controversial intentionally for us. It kind of changed 2020, 21. It kind of began to take on this. We began to hear this idea of like your Brexiteers, or this idea
Yeah.
that it
Mhm.
meant that it was for white folk only.
Yeah.
And, it brings us into the whole conversation, I suppose, about race, about skin color, about indigeneity worldwide. It's like, so it was interesting. We kind of fell into this portal. But I suppose we began to feel, well, maybe it's the word. Maybe it's the word. It's not that we have stopped using that word. It still appears a lot in some of our outputs and also our conversation. But when you go back to the Dúchas, the activation of the Dúchas, we have been doing a lot of work around understanding what Dúchas was. But to actually activate it, if you're asking people to decolonize, re-indigenize, the activization of Dúchas is Dúchas. It's an adjective. So it's like, this is how it goes. This is how it moves. This is how it breathes. So relearning your language uh, is a process. Dúchas is a process as opposed to being fluent in Irish. That makes sense. So we began to become much more interested in what the process entailed and the activization of the ideas that were coming not just from
Yeah.
us, but from many other quarters.
So you're using the word we quite a lot, and this would be a good opportunity to talk about the other members of your team.
Mm.
like Helen Niehenry and Shane O'Connor. So
Mm.
what did they bring to the table, and how does that dynamic work, shaping the organization's goals? What diverse perspectives do they bring to the table?
Um, there's definitely a broader group of people out there as well who didn't formally set up an association with us. Myself and Shane and Helen formed an association. But prior to that, there were other people like I've mentioned, Dr. Liam Campbell and 𝗟ci𝗿𝗰𝗰𝗠𝗰𝗕𝗿𝗏. I don't think she would be afraid to be cited here either. Were seminal in kind of working alongside us and developing educational tools. And the Triscoly process as a mentoring program was developed by myself and Shane and 𝗟ci, for example, and I wrote it up then and began to become the mentor in it. Um, but everybody's got their own dynamic around business and um, what they need to devote their lives to. So when it came down to people forming the association that became Indigenous Ireland, Erdu, it was the three of us. Um, Shane had really brought in, as part of the Triscoly learning, he brought in the idea of cold water immersion. And it was kind of around the time that everybody was getting into Wim Hof, which was quite funny, because we were doing just crazy things to kind of try and replicate some of the lessons that the Maoris had already put us through. They took us on some journeys when they came to Ireland and kind of tried to get us to see things from their perspective. Um, so we were trying to recreate that in a way, and one of the processes we were using was cold water immersion. Um, so Shane kind of brought it in, and we were using a lot of breath work. It's kind of one of the modalities in it. And the intention around that was to wake us up to our reality as biological entities, that we live so much in our rational brain and try and control our lives and build our psychology and our output in a rational and conscious means that there were actually sometimes we don't really understand how our biological processes or what that's all built upon. So there became a real focus on health, and we began to understand everything that we were doing was about health restoration and seeing ourselves as, linked into natural processes of health restoration. And this has become a big theme in the north of Ireland post-conflict, right across different communities in different ways, people working out of narratives around cultural or sectarian conflict and into health and well-being. So we weren't doing anything that really was that different from other people. And this became really obvious, when people began to open water swim much more in 2020, 2021, for, as you probably know, big sociological happenings at the time.
Yeah,
And
don't remind me.
yeah, don't remind me exactly, but it was lovely to see the validation. Like we'd been working on this from about 2016, 17, so about 3 years prior. And you just saw, wow, people are just walking into the water in response to inflammation, be it physiological inflammation or be it sociological conflagration, and going there for calmness and soothing. And we weren't telling them to do it. They certainly weren't taking any message in from us. And it was just like, that is incredible. Look at that. Just like it was just a real validation of the process. And then I suppose as a development of that, Helen kind of came in. She actually was one of the people I mentored through the Triscoly process, and she came in and she had a background in peace building work, but also in psychology as a psychology graduate. So she began to pick apart this idea of the rational brain, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and began to kind of try and look at 70% of everything we do is like from our reptilian brain. You
Yeah,
know, so our
ritual
motivation,
habits, hierarchy. Yeah,
Yeah. So how was that helpful to us? Um, we became, I suppose, through Helen's influence, our practice became embodied as opposed to rational. So Shane had started off this idea of nature connection through kind of cold shock, effectively. And Helen kind of brought that forward by basically saying, you know, there's loads of other aspects to our being that we need to consider beside the rational. It's not just about soothing the mind, it's actually about safety. And when we are in the water, we are we're connecting by osmosis. We're kind of forced to connect
Yeah,
as opposed to decide to connect.
yeah.
Does that make sense? There's no
It
escaping
does. It does. It makes
connection.
perfect sense.
Yeah. So that modality, like we've begun to do a lot of work under the water now. And I hadn't really explored that terrain at all. What is under our water? Because it has become such a arena for um, linking into that osmotic connection, which we're reptilian, mammalian, and cognitive all at the same time. Um, and I suppose to finish that off, like Shane kind of began to specialize in breath work and works a lot in breath work through different groups and modalities. Helen probably is doing a lot of work with women's groups within the modalities that she uses. And yeah, I'm still working a lot in the outdoors with people and doing writing as well. So we're kind of
Yeah.
looking at the whole project from a range of angles.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned it a couple of times, Triskelle process. And I'm smiling here because I think what you're describing is very much like a Triskellian, the triple spiral, which is here somewhere. I can't see where, this is the logo that I use.
Mhm.
And I kind of see the three of you working as a triple spiral. But for those who are not familiar with the Triskelle process, myself included, could you just talk me through how does that typically work? Like if I wanted to work with you guys through a Triskelle process, what steps would I need to go through?
Mm. Um, so currently it's written up and is sold online as a mentoring process, which people can self mentor themselves through. I've also written a similar one for parents to use with kids, which hasn't been published yet. Um, and it was developed through a number of sessions by 𝗟ci𝗿𝗰𝗰, Shane O'Connor, and myself, uh, mostly as practitioners coming from outdoor work. As you probably know, 𝗟ci𝗿𝗰𝗰 is an award-winning female surfer. Shane was coming very much
Didn't know
from.
that, but that's news to me.
Yes, she is. Yeah, lives in Rossnowla in Donegal. Shane is a youth and community worker and activist who lives in Madrid. And my expertise was probably coming from outdoor adventure work. So we were integrating a lot of the notions that the Maori had kind of given us when they arrived in 2016 as exercises and trying to understand what that meant to us. It took quite a long time, but we ended up with three areas, and that was important. It was 𝗟ci who proposed the model, taking it from one of our national monuments. And I think one of the reasons, like I knew the Triscoly as a kind of, people use it even in a Christianized context, the Holy Ghost, you know, all this kind of thing. But it's been used in various other ways, and different groups use it to signify three different modalities. Um, And we saw that as really important in terms of not being dualistic in our thinking and beginning to break the dualistic hold. We also saw the model as really interesting that it was an evolutionary model and that the spirals themselves suggest evolution. We spent an awful lot of time looking at cycles for a couple of years, the cycles of the sun, moon, tides, stars, etc., as we began to chart them and look at like being aware of we're all aware of when the sun rises and sets, but are we aware of where the when the moon rises and sets? We began to realize the moon rises sometimes during the day and all those things that are cyclical in our
Yeah. It's fascinating.
It's amazing. But I suppose within those three areas, we then described three separate areas of work. The first one, which we saw as fundamental, was nature connection. And importantly, we put the sacred in that space, that the nature connection was sacred. Um, and the way that's expressed in Irish is 𝗤𝘅𝗢𝗢, which is a translation of sacred, but it also means literally unbreakable. So that connection with nature is fundamental
Yeah.
to that process to start
Well,
with.
this comes back to what I was saying earlier about the words in Irish. Why I love the Irish language so much is that there's many layers to the words that we use. And I was thinking brishta, that means broken, but then when you told me what it actually meant, I was like, that's the extra bit at the start. That's the prefix at the start that means unbreakable. And then that what that does, it triggers your mind to start thinking about, well, why would something sacred be also called unbreakable? And then it
Mm.
just brings you on a journey of, uh, imagination and speculation um, that you don't really get with English.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's really true. And it's a lovely, it's an added, advantage to being bilingual, for example, or to attempt to have other languages. I'm sure in different world languages that would also be broadened out. But for us, um, it kind of equates a bit to the lens. Um, we can go deeper and look at like why as a culture we has that connection been broken, or has it attempted to be broken? And that restoring that connection is a fundamental first step on reversing what has tried to break it in the first place.
Yeah.
And linked to that connection is also the concept of baile or home. And we're all familiar in the Irish language with everything being called Bally this and Bally that, and place names being translated back from the English, sometimes only etymonic representation of the word in Irish, not the epistemological or the meaning side of it,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
translating it back and saying, well, what is this supposed to mean?
Yeah.
And Bally being Balia. And I suppose when we look at home, we regard that as a fundamental concept as well within that part of the Triscoly, because we are educated perpetually to think that we are going to learn something by leaving. When you look at Ireland sociologically and immigration and all those things and continued immigration and the immigration and disposal of knowledge, um, it's completely fundamental. You are going to find your well-being somewhere that is not your home.
Yeah.
And we
So,
and others are part of that counter movement.
yes. So, in the context of what you're talking about, Ireland's complex history of immigration, the the troubles, um, I feel like Ireland is quite fragmented. Um, the complicated relationship with the Catholic Church, for example. So, how does Erdu aim to heal the past? Um, so what sort of projects are you working on that would kind of build up fortitude for the future and also address and acknowledge that difficult past that we've had?
Um, it's the most complicated part of the work we do, and we were kind of recognizing that by putting the first part of the Triscoly as nature connection, because we can restore nature connection and we can arguably even restore health and well-being without having to worry about big problems that you're articulating there, at least to start off with. If we want to move on to big problems, we're moving into a different part of the Triscoly. And the second spiral is we describe as imaginative reality, or 𝗟cie𝗿𝗰𝗆𝗄𝗏, also in English, the truth of knowing. So it kind of describes everything we ascribe meaning to, and the language sits in there. All our cultural vernacular expressions of identity sit in there, because they impose meaning on the first spiral. Um, Represented, I forgot to say the first spiral represented in our symbol you can see behind me here as the 𝗟ci𝗿𝗰𝗕𝗿𝗢, the she-wolf, one of the extinct ancestors and totemic ancestors, that protective and benign influence. The second spiral being represented by the salmon of knowledge. So we're familiar with knowledge as a cyclical process, but it confers meaning on the first. So people can connect to nature and draw different interpretations on what it is. But on this island, we confer certain interpretations based on our language, based on our vernacular history, based on our Neolithic architecture, based on our transcriptions, based on our music, you know, based on our iron sweaters, based on all these things that are unique to the cultures and culture on this island. So when we get into that Triskelle or into that second spiral, we're talking about conferring meaning, and the truth of knowing also incorporates the imagination, how Ireland is such an imaginative landscape, and the people
Yes, of
through
course.
literature and many other means. We went to visit Michael Quirk, who some people would know has a small shop in Sligo, a butcher turned into a sculptor, but also a 𝗟liche, somebody who holds old stories. And I remember saying to Michael was describing I think the Battle of Moytura to me that happened outside Sligo between Columkill and the High King at the time over the first case of copyright. And I said, yeah, but Michael, did it actually happen? Did it take place? Or, is it just a story? And he put his head right close to mine and he tapped his forehead and he said, is what is in here real or not? And immediately, it was just this big light going on. Yeah, the reality of our imaginations, what we
Hmm.
deem into being, and the truth and the meaning that we ascribe to what goes on is cultural,
Yeah.
is
Even
fundamental.
that question you asked, it just represents a desire to be certain, a desire for certainty, like something that you can hold on to as a fact. But the
Yeah,
fact that he just tapped his head and said, "Is what's in here real?" It was a very good answer.
yeah. And I'm coming back to answering your question. I know I'm taking a circuitous route, but the third spiral that I probably need to describe for your audience is um, the kind of the one that sits atop everything else, and we really struggled with describing what this is going to be, what it means. Effectively, the Anrun Cynula, or Anrun Cynul, is we call it loving intention, but it's really our ancestral connection. If you want to describe it clearly, it would be the biological impossibility of us all being here at this time, and that impossibility being countered by the love that brought two people together to procreate, and not just people, but also all the other dúla and things that are in our environment, in our biome. And the immense impossibility in terms of probability that we are here right now, but because of all those efforts, all those life experiences, the disconnection that we have had from our ancestral heritage, who can name their seven generations going back to the
Yeah,
year 1800 or so, like the Maori can. They can rhyme
yeah.
off the papa. They know where it comes straight through their communities, from their landscape to their community, into their families and clans. And we used to be able to. So I suppose, when we try and look at those issues that you're suggesting in modern Ireland that are all coming fast, thick and fast at us, we kind of try and go back and ground ourselves in those three elements of the Triskele. First of all, they describe and are reinforced by other Indigenous cultures worldwide that are working in very similar ways on similar issues: ancestral connection, nature connection, what is knowledge and cultural revivance and history, and how do we ascribe meaning. not based on whether we are a certain percentage of this or that or the other, but based on our values and practices. So they align us really, really well, but they also allow us to interrogate our history, not just from a purely cognitive position, but from an experiential and embodied perspective as well.
Fascinating. So,
So solutions, maybe you're looking for something
well,
perspective.
I have a couple more questions to ask. And I suppose the next one, because you were talking about disconnection and your whole what I'm hearing from you is that the whole purpose of Indigenous Ireland is to give vehicles and routes for people to reconnect with their heritage, with their ancestors, and with nature. So I want to ask you, is there any like personal wound or disconnection that you have experienced that drove you to focus on healing this division and this disconnection between humans and other sentient species?
Good question. Um, I suppose like personally, I've always felt, many people have different ways of expressing it. Sometimes you'll be at the top of a mountain and somebody will go, "This is my church." So they're making a decision between a spiritual place within a building, whatever denomination, and a spiritual place, not in a building and in nature. And without really ever articulating it, I've always felt, probably from the way I grew up, that my place was my settled place was in my reptilian self, outdoors,
Yeah,
that conscious world I kind of struggled with, you know, and I struggled to fit in and find a tribe and kind of be okay within that place, usually as a person who has lots of questions and potentially takes the devil's advocate position, finds it hard to roll along with the flow of everybody else, and is always kind of going, well, what about this? And hang on, that you didn't think about that. Um, for me, for the last 10 years, what I kind of embarked on was a process of straightening the arrow. And that's the way I saw it, that I was kind of a bit broken between what I did for a living, between my kind of childhood, my family, how my family worked together, how I saw the world and what I envisaged for the future. And I began to straighten everything out and say, well, if I don't like that, I'll stop doing it. In terms of my own
yeah.
personal health,
Mhm.
and well-being, trying to focus on what, without being obsessed by it, what made me feel good. And once that process starts, I suppose it naturally leads you or led me into a place where I'm completely comfortable in a forest talking to everything in that forest. They're not talking Berla or Gaelic back to me, but they're talking their own language.
Yeah,
And I see it as what we would call gathering evidence, that we can't really come to any of those conclusions about what is wrong with Ireland, what is wrong with the world, what is wrong with us, how can we go forward without having the evidence, because our evidence now is completely overwhelming. There's too much. It's hyper politicized, it's hyper opinionated, it's possibly very egocentric as well and agenda driven.
yeah,
And really, that is not what is going to make us well. We need to understand that our ecosystems is where our wealth is lies. Restoring and understanding what drives our ecosystems is fundamental. There are obviously forces at work that want to deplete those, but we can't even get into an interrogation of that and a counter movement of opposing extractivism if we aren't gathering our own evidence and we don't know what's going on. So that's fundamental. And to gather that evidence, we need the language of the doula. We need to be able to speak. It's not about counting things. Okay, that might be a component, but we need to know what those things are saying to us. what they want and how they're moving. And the only way we can do that is by immersing ourselves in that environment again and again and again and again. Then we can come to the table with something unique and original that
Yeah.
people need to actually talk about, in my view. And I think the more people enter into that envelope, and that number is growing exponentially, in my opinion, also, then we're talking about what we need to be talking about.
Yeah. So I visited your website a few times, and I noticed that you have a section of the website called Taurus, TURAS. And these are other groups that you are collaborating with, working with. And so I guess my question is, could you speak a little bit about those relationships that you have? And if there's any other global indigenous movements, which which would you like to work with and which would you like to pursue to enhance Erdu Indigenous Ireland's goals?
So on our website, we have a couple of pages. The first one kind of describes roughly what we think our agenda is. Then there's one about us ourselves and the different projects we're involved with. And then we have a tourist page, which is actually about our offers to the public. And it kind of breaks down the Triscoly into some kind of manageable chunks that people can take as an event and purely on a donation basis. So we're not monetizing that. And we have a whole thing, a policy around monetization that we don't really do it. We try not to do it. We pay for cover costs, but generally our labor and our intellectual input into any of that stuff is pro bono. We kind of feel that we've been given a gift and continue to be given gifts by other Indigenous peoples worldwide that we can't monetize, and it's not our responsibility. It's the wrong way to put it. And systemically as well, we don't want to be bound by the whole crazy stuff around how people are controlled by money, and our society is controlled by profit and loss. So that's that. We also have a page for members, which possibly is what you've been referring to, Kevin, and that's where people can join our Dúchas based on a very simple kind of set of criteria that they're working along similar lines, either in forest restoration or, seed activism or cultural renewal. It could be in any part of the land or beyond that as part of the diaspora. And we've had academics, writers, people involved in cultural work, people involved in many aspects of the broad field that it is come along and join us, but not as many as we would have thought to start off with. And that was, I suppose, maybe that appeal going out originally as Indigenous Ireland was possibly viewed somewhat with, a critical, you know, perhaps dismissal in certain parts, people maybe thinking it was something it wasn't, or maybe just not liking
I
the
was
offer.
asked, I've been asked, is it nativist? Is
Hmm.
Indigenous Ireland nativist, implying that it's only for Irish white people, you know?
Yeah, and I think that it's a failure of language, in a way. It's maybe a failure of the English language to express what we want to express, but it's also possibly a failure of um of us being able to articulate what it is we're
Yeah,
doing.
and it's also a failure of imagination.
Yes, for sure. And maybe just a modern day attempt to kind of categorize by example and by what's happening. Manulai is one of the ladies that we met in Hawaii recently, who is an amazing scholar in the University of Hawaii. And she has this lovely way of expressing an intention around, if we are generalizing to the specific, that is oppressive, that is an oppression. If we are going from our specific cultural experience to the general, we are offering wealth into that general understanding of humanity. And we can't rule ourselves through what's going on anywhere else in the world. Like we need to start in our culturally relevant place with our feet in the ground or in the
Yeah.
water and make our
Hmm.
own decisions about and have conversations. So the conversations we have with our members now are really they're beginning to move on from what they were, I think, even 2 years ago, where I think a lot of people felt under pressure to um, to define themselves according to what was going on in the world, which has been a really fractious, set of circumstances since 2000, March 2020 on. And I think a lot of our members who are working in their own areas that we're not really accountable for and they're not accountable to us for, but working away studiously on their own learning and development, really now want to have the conversations together. I think we're edging towards a place that we're going to be gathered from bringing our own perspectives together, trying to find a peer-driven uh, practice that allows us to feed in from different aspects of the work that we're doing that enhances the whole. Somebody may be specifically working on water-based knowledge, for example, and the importance of the seas and inland waterways in Ireland and what they mean and how we protect them and what we need to activate. They might be bringing that particular understanding to the table, and other people will be bringing stuff around, soil regeneration, seed saving, all these kind of modalities that we can't all be experts in. But I think the important thing is that there seems to be a change in the temperature that people feel we can't remain divided. We can't remain a splinter group of a splinter group of a splinter group within the modalities that we want to work in. And the idea of nativism, for example, you know, isn't one that we dreamed up. It's not something that we decided to live by or coined a phrase. It's something coming from a politics beyond beyond.
Outside, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can only do so much to kind of allay people's concerns, but most of those concerns I would go back to are cognitive. You know, they're not really based on your feet in the ground or your body in the water. They're based on intellectual concepts that are going around the ether. And I've just from my perspective personally, just have a high degree of potential for manipulation,
Yeah.
uh, to try and divide people cognitively, politically, socially, try and put them against each other and say you don't do. And I've seen so much of that over the last 5 years in particular that, you know, it's not of interest whatsoever.
Yeah. So I just have a couple more questions for you.
Mm.
So we've been talking a lot about Indigenous Ireland and the work that you've been doing and the relationships that you've been building. So if you could achieve one transformative outcome through your work, what would it be? And perhaps that's restoring a specific ecosystem, revitalizing a lost tradition like Brehon law, or shifting national consciousness. What would be a dream achievement for you to achieve?
There's probably a couple of things. Like we're getting to a stage, I think, that we understand that we need to kind of restore the land connection and the land base that many of us have become migrants within our own country
Strangers
and
at home, exiles in
changes
errand.
in our own homes. Yeah. And many of us, it's not a political statement. We're living in transient environments and in a state or part of a place that we don't have a nature connection to and we've no inheritance for. Like the last land that was in my family was sold probably in the 1990s or earlier, the 80s. So a lot of us have lost our land base. And I think in tandem with other indigenous cultures, the restoration of land base is really important, although it's very controversial. But the lifeways go hand in hand with that. We don't really have to restore the land base to keep the lifeways going. But having said that, really what needs to inform our lifeways is our land base. It's the putting our hands in the
Yeah,
soil
yeah,
or it's swimming in the sea and protecting and restoring our waterways that is the future. We need to be that needs to be our day and daily. And specifically in the northwest, we have a beautiful and mighty river that we've been doing a few podcasts ourselves about, the 𝗟𝗏𝘢𝗏𝘢𝘐, the River Foyle, that's got an incredible heritage, much abused in recent years. So some of the research we've been doing, talking to people with different irons in the fire as such around that river, is based around that. Some of the activism we would be involved with as individuals and as a group would be with other people who have concerns about what has been done and what is being done in that ecosystem in particular. It's a massive ecosystem, 3,500 kilometers square. So there's many different parts of it. Our
Yeah.
The part that we kind of relate to, we swam the river to kind of over 2 to 3 days, day and night, to try and really understand where the river was at. Is the lower reaches of it where it comes into the sea. It's an estuary, a tidal estuary for about 75 kilometers, and that's kind of the part that we're kind of living in and among. And every time we're outside and in it, on it, beside it, we are gathering evidence at every juncture. So we would love to leave behind ourselves for our Sinshiranan, our ancestors in the making, our children and other generations, a better ecosystem around the foil, or processes that they can work towards to stop it getting any worse, for sure. And we believe kind of like the other objective is really around that membership piece, that we're not sure where it's going to go, but the feeling is that it's going to become more collegiate, perhaps grow, if not pause at a level of peers, because we see this sector really, really mushrooming, that there's many groups coming in, and at times people haven't always had the advantage of being knocked over the head by the likes of 𝘤𝘩𝘢𝘐𝗍𝘢𝘐 and other Indigenous leaders that we have had a number of years ago, and developed our practice coming out of that and in accordance with that and guided by that and in communication with that. So we do feel that we've been through a fairly long process, that we don't know everything by any stretch of the imagination. We don't have all the answers, but we have come through certain learnings that the peers within our members, we feel that they've also been on their journey. We've done the hard stuff, and they're pretty clear about what they know and what they don't know. So we kind of believe that we've got something to say. It might be said one-to-one, it might be said in meetings, it might be said in writing, it could be said in music. At the moment, we're composing with other people a range of songs for ceremony as 𝗟𝘅𝘅𝗏𝗍𝗍. So they'll go out pro bono as Irish, very simple Irish texts that people can use when they want to practice ceremony on this island and beyond. Will be served as a way of learning simple Irish, but also as connecting spiritually through the
Wow.
language. So there's loads of iterations of the work that we do, and hopefully it's all gonna cycle around.
So I have a couple more questions left. And
Mm.
if if resources were not an object, if money was unlimited, or if you had a magic wand and you could do anything, you could achieve anything with this magic wand, what would be a project or a goal that you would like to achieve um, if money was no object? And why I'm asking you this is because how would you use this opportunity to amplify the voices of Ireland's land, her waters, and the Sinseir na hÉireann, the ancestors of Ireland?
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting question to be posed, Kevin, because you know, there's a lot to do. And one of the problems is that, if you get involved in kind of very strategic goals, you'll end up working on strategy. Don't have much room for plant and veg or anything like that. And I think what has become clear to us, and I think many other people, is that the system that's currently operating is broken.
Hmm.
And we're not interested in hospice in the system. We're not like there's other modalities and people working within the system, obviously in a very benign way. And I don't take anything away from that desire to um, to try and husband the system into a better place. But we believe that other systems need to be built, and there is maybe an architecture around that that needs to be understood. If it's not going to be the system that is failing us, what does that mean and what does it look
Mm.
like?
Yeah.
And it has to be grounded also in our past. As the Maori would say, we look to our past for our future, you know, and like Michael Cronin, who published the book 𝗟𝗩𝘢𝘅𝗙𝗍𝗍, 𝗟𝗩𝘢𝘅𝗙𝗍𝗍, Language and Ecology in a bilingual format. Professor of French at Professor of French at TCD, outlines that you can't really talk about climate change, for instance, without talking with Irish and through Irish, because our knowledge base in the language is our environmental understanding. So we need to look to the past. If we're looking at a new system, and you're familiar with this, I'm sure, having done a lot of work on the Brehon laws, if we're
Yes.
looking at a new system that isn't captured, that isn't colonial, that isn't capitalist, that isn't extractive, that isn't monetized, then what is it? So
Yeah.
if somebody was to say, well, you've got 3 years or 5 years just to look at that and to try and create that linkage between embodied practice and systemic renewal, or a new system or an old system that's going to be fit for purpose, what would that be? That would interest me.
Yeah. So this is my last question. Maybe I'll have a follow-up depending on how you answer it. But can you just imagine an Ireland where Indigenous Ireland as an organization isn't necessary? It's not needed anymore. Can you try and describe what that looks like? So what I'm getting at here is, what is the ultimate goal of Indigenous Ireland, and how will you know when you've achieved it?
Hmm. I suppose we're very much in the realm of education and training. That's what we do in different iterations, and most of it is, embodied or experiential learning. So it's not about sitting around talking, it's about doing together, outdoors usually, and learning. Um, Going back to the systemic stuff, I kind of see at the moment when you begin to really circulate with people and talk to them, despite all the negative, oppressive kind of dialogue that's coming through social media and media, I think there's a leaky bag. My mind imagines this plastic bag with fluid inside it that somebody's taken a pen and poked holes in. And it's a sheer impossibility to patch those holes because it's becoming more and more frequent that people are puncturing, you know, the membrane that's keeping the current the current social reality together with good things in a good way by asking questions, by being creative, by being culturally engaged, by continuing the work that started off in the 70s with language restoration, for example, and what's happened similar to the embodied practice that people are walking into the water, what's happening within our language communities, in our urban centers. Like each of these things, you know, it's like a stab at the heart of a system that isn't working for people. I would love it. Imagine our diaspora came home. We
Yeah.
couldn't lose them all for a start, but imagine our diaspora began to come home,
Yeah.
and the generation really that need to leave,
Yeah.
the 20 somethings through to the 40 somethings.
I'm just thinking of the picture of the nurses and doctors over in Australia with holding up a poster saying, "Give us a reason to come home."
Mm. Yeah, like in a
Um,
way, it's like we're very familiar in the north with people taking work on and for the first year or two going, well, I was earning more in the dole. I was getting this paid for and that paid for. And now I'm working, you know, 5 or 6 days a week, earning the exact same money I had in the dole, but people still manage to wean themselves off,
yeah,
you know, social security. And I think that's the same thing that the diaspora need to think about. And I'm really positive in the interactions we have with the diaspora, we get a lot of that desire. It's a latent desire. So
yes,
I just think that like there's still something that's bottleable in what it means to be from these islands. And it's not bottleable in the way, people go, buy Irish and all the kind of reductive nonsense that goes on around
hmm
tokenistic. But
yeah,
the people who've come in through and live on this island still understand that there's something unique and special. And the Maori in particular, as well as other indigenous cultures, would look at the length and breadth, not only of our inheritance culturally, going back, at least 10,000 years before Celtic Ireland into that period where we don't really even have accurate descriptions of those people through the colonial period, the Christian period, the colonial period, like in a way we're the worst and the best in that we've had intense experiences, massacres, awful things that have happened, famines, repeated famines that have happened in our culture. We've survived them. We can show it's possible to survive them. The problem is that we've
we're a
become so,
hardy old bunch.
we're a hardy old bunch. If we can deal with the colonialism of the mind and extract ourselves from that,
Great
and
phrase, yeah,
in a way, it is about the streams of consciousness. The minute if you allow those streams to go, and creativity is key to our culture, and I think we are going to
yeah,
we are going to see those streams grow and grow. Uh, we shouldn't be necessary in a sense, in that many organizations looking for the kind of results that we're looking for, they're growing up all over the place, and as they grow, in a way, they should become more dilute because people are just engaging in what they do on an everyday
yes,
basis.
exactly.
Yeah.
Very well
And
said. And as you were speaking there, it just have you heard of Buckminster Fuller? He had a famous quote saying like, "Don't try to change the system, build a new system that renders the old system obsolete."
mm,
And that's what I when you were talking about, the leaky bag or it's a broken system. The way I see Indigenous Ireland is that you guys are trying to build a new system that renders the old one obsolete, something that's just there for people to check into and a vehicle for reconnecting with their heritage, with their roots, and giving people a sense of purpose and meaning in their life. So, is
hmm.
there any questions that you would have liked me to have asked you?
I suppose when you come down to this notion of how you can be Indigenous in Ireland, that's quite a deep conversation. If you just look at the practice of other cultural experiences, and it's not without its nuances, we have a wide variety of expressions of that. And ultimately, we have to articulate our own variety of it, but it's informed by the connections and solidarity we have with other peoples. It's frustrating for me if I feel people are subjugating themselves to other people's knowledge, but I understand because I went through it myself of
Mhm.
having to listen to people from completely the other side of the planet to even get conscious myself of what was going on and what needed to happen. But that ability to stand side by side and shoulder to shoulder with other Indigenous people cognitively, obviously in person, and to visit each other and to understand what's happening in our communities, both good and bad, around the colonial footprint, but also around the cultural restoration, language being a key component of that. Um, but that, if you want to call it solidarity, if you want to call it co co work, the work that we're doing, I think is another really important principle. We've been very much welcomed as white Irish inverted commas into many different cultural spaces among Indigenous people, and they've freely given us voice to explain ourselves. And the modalities that work within those exchanges are very different from the very hypercritical modalities that we're becoming engendered to within this part of Europe, where everybody has to take a position. They're very much more set out your stall, tell us. And when we do that, we find that the values that we're talking about coalesce very much with each other. What we have to offer them is that survivance element, because many of them look to us and say, well, we have commonalities here. How did you guys manage to get through the last 1,000 years, the last 2,000 years, given what's happened? And I think we're a kind of beacon. Problem is we don't really have the cultural confidence to express that. Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
we really understand what does it mean to have survived such genocidal intent and such repeated difficulty, to the extent that within each and every one of our DNA, we inhabit that. It inhabits us. We can't afford to say those people over there are the enemy and these people over here are the good ones. That has gone long ago. We actually have this in our DNA. And that for me is an amazing asset that we can bring into the conversation with peoples worldwide around where we need to go, because it's a choice. It's a choice about where we put ourselves, what our footsteps are going to be. But we still remain in our infancy almost and we need our brothers and sisters worldwide. We need to be comparing ourselves and understanding the similarities and also the differences to go where
Here,
we're going
here,
to go. So
here. Very well said. So, Lorcan, this has been a very interesting and educational conversation. Just before we go, where's the best place for people to connect with you and connect with your work?
Indigenous.ie, on Instagram, Indigenous.ie, I think as well, or possibly Dúchas. I don't know exactly how it comes up. Probably the best place to start. Just get in touch. We're a bit on Facebook, again, Indigenous Ireland, I think, on Facebook. But yeah, or in the street or by email. We get a lot of people emailing us, indigenousireland@gmail.com, and we'll get diaspora, we'll get somebody might be in one end of the country and they've heard something happening and they just want to talk. So we always respond. We have really interesting conversations, between anybody who wants to engage with us. They don't have to agree or even be doing anything with us. It could be just something that they have a question or they want to kind of inquire about something. We had an inquiry recently about one of our events about how it would be accessible to people who weren't able-bodied, for example. And we then have to think about, well, how do we make outdoor experiences
Yeah.
accessible and available to people? So there's loads of ways people come at us and come to
Well,
us.
Lorcan, go raibh míle maith agat, os the arm, agus os the ólas, and I would say at this point, slán go fáil.
Good 𝘤𝘩𝘢𝘴𝘢𝘢. May the good be done on to you as well. Kevin, thanks very much for offering the space and the time to chat about our work and what lights our fire.
Tá fáil se bhailt. Slán.
Right. Amor. Slán.
Sin é a chuirde. That was Lorcan McBride or McGillivreid from Indigenous Ireland or Erdu. I want to thank you all for watching and listening for the duration. And if you got to this point in the video, thank you very much. I'm going to share the contact information for Indigenous Ireland and for Lorcan in the description of this video and in the top pinned comment. So, without further ado, slán go fáil.